Hey guys, this is part 3 in my Sydex 486 restoration series. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, this is a 486 DX266 with 16 megs of memory and a real 850 meg IDE hard drive. I haven't installed a Windows 95 on the computer, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about the early internet as it would have been around 1996. So the first thing we need to do, if this is 1996, we need a dial-up modem. Now, of course, I don't have a dial-up modem in this computer. I have a network card, but let's pretend for the moment. So we're going into Control Panel, and let's go into Modems. Now, I never had one of the big name modems. I always had some generic piece of crap that wasn't in the list. So let's select a generic modem. And I'm going to go with a 28.8. I actually had a 28.8 modem in 1997. We'll put that on COM 2 because my mouse is on COM 1. And according to Windows, that modem has been added successfully. It doesn't seem to matter that there's no modem actually physically in the computer. Windows thinks there is. Things will change when we try to talk to that device, of course. So once you've got a modem installed, then you need to create a dial-up networking connection. So we'll go into dial-up networking, make a connection, and I'm going to call this one Simpatico. Simpatico was one of the early ISPs that I had. And we need a number that we're going to dial into. And no, I'm not going to sing that. And save that info. And now let's try and connect to Simpatico. Drop in my username. And we need a password. And connect. Now at this point you would typically hear the screeching of the modem, but of course, again, we don't have a modem physically in the system. So I'm just going to play an MP3 of the modem sounds in the background here. And now we're connected to the internet. In the 1990s, connecting to the internet was typically something you had to consciously do. The days of always-on internet wouldn't come until later in the 90s, early in the 2000s. So there was a slightly clearer distinction between the online and the offline world. Let's go into Netscape. That was a common browser back in the day. I actually remember using Netscape 2.0.2 under Windows 3.1. Now, a lot of modern websites simply won't work with these older browsers. There's newer internet protocols that old browsers like this simply don't understand. But if you do want to experience the old internet, you can go to a site called theoldnet.com. This will actually let you bring up snapshots of old websites from years gone by. And it presents them in a way that older browsers can actually understand. Now, one of the common search engines that we used back then was Alta Vista. You got to remember, this is in the days before Google came on the scene. Yeah, it's honestly hard to imagine a world without Google nowadays. Now, search engines at the time weren't terribly refined. Your search results might be sporadic. Sometimes you'd find what you were looking for, other times, well, not so much. But we always seem to find something interesting. So let's take a look at Netscape Mail. Now, I've actually built a FreeBSD email server just for testing purposes. It's called Jasmine. Let's go in and configure an email account, and we'll send a couple of mails. So for my outgoing mail server, I have an smtp.jasmine.local, and incoming is pop3.jasmine.local. I'm going to use a user called Annika. She already exists on the Jasmine server. And she's got an email of Annika@jasmine.local. Okay, that all looks good. Now, the only real difference where I have smtp.jasmine.local, in real life you would have seen something like smtp.jasmine.com. But this server is simply on the internal network behind a firewall. So let's send an email. Now, there's another user on the Jasmine server, Scott@jasmine.local. And let's see if Scott's free for the weekend. And send that message. And I'm going to hit Get Mail right away. Nope, nothing new. So we'll give that server a moment or two to process the message. And while we're waiting, let's bring up Internet Explorer. This, of course, is another common browser that we would have used back in the day. And from here, I can go into Mail. This will bring up an early version of Outlook Express. And we're going to do the same thing in Outlook Express. We'll configure an account, except this time I'm going to set up the account for Scott. So we're going into Mail, go into Options, and go to Server. Okay, so let's put in the information for Scott. That would be scott@jasmine.local, smtp.jasmine.local, and a pop3.jasmine.local as well. Drop in the username and the password. Okay, we're using a LAN connection. Now, of course, back in the mid to late 90s, you would have been using a dial-up connection, unless you were at a university, of course. Okay, that all looks good. And apply that info. And let's check and see if Scott has any mail. And there's the message from Annika. And of course, Scott's going to write back and say, "Hell yes, let's get together." And we'll send that reply. And just in case, I'm going to hit send receive. And there's our message on its way. Now, instant messaging was still fairly new in 1996. As a matter of fact, I believe ICQ actually came out in 1996. So if you were using it back then, you would have been an early adopter. But there's a certain nostalgia to it, so I figured I should include it in this video. Now, the ICQ servers were shut down in 2024, so I don't know how far we're going to get with this, but let's give it a shot. Okay, installation complete. And we've got a DLL error. Uh-oh. All right, I found that DLL. I had to install the Visual C++ redistributable. And now if I run ICQ, that looks better. Okay, so I'm going to create a new user. And of course, in this case, we're a LAN user. Now, drop in my email, cleanretrotech@gmail.com. And drop in my nick. Okay, yes, I am 50 years old. I'm pretty vintage myself. Now, of course, it's going to reach out to the server and try to create a user. And I suspect that's where this is going to fail. And yep, this program has performed an illegal operation and will be shut down. Now, that was a common message to see in Windows 95, actually continued into Windows 98 to a lesser degree. So, no, obviously we're not going to be able to connect to the ICQ servers, but there is something we can do. Let's dig down into that ICQ program. And there's a folder here with all the ICQ sounds. Just to bring back some memories, I'm going to play a couple of those.
Incoming chat request. Incoming chat request. Uh-oh! Uh-oh! User is online. User is online.
Personally, I never used ICQ. It was a great way of keeping in touch with your friends, but, well, I didn't have any friends, so. So the last topic I want to touch on in this video is Usenet newsgroups. It was essentially an early form of social media, only there were no upvotes and downvotes, no followers, and it was a decentralized network. There was no centralized entity that would dictate what you could or couldn't say. Now, I didn't have time to create my own NNTP Newsnet server, so I'm just going to use an external server here. I've created an account. And let's pop in and just kind of poke around here. Usenet was divided based on topic. There'd be a separate group for essentially every topic you wanted to discuss. Now, primarily it was text-based, but some people did use it for sharing various binary files. As a result, it has something of a questionable reputation. The internet of the 1990s was slow and clunky. Things didn't always work the way we wanted them to, but it had a certain charm to it. Everything was new, everything was magical. The internet nowadays has been standardized, sanitized, and corporatized. There seems to be very little room for open discussion and debate, and nuance has completely fallen by the wayside. So if you enjoyed this one, please feel free to like and subscribe. Drop a comment down below. And, as always, thanks for watching.